The cabin had gone silent. Not just quiet, silent. The kind of hush that comes when people aren't sure if they are witnessing a misunderstanding or something uglier. A dozen heads turned. Some stared openly. Others pretended not to notice. But their ears were tuned in like satellite dishes. The man in the aisle looked confused, like he hadn't heard right. He was tall, with deep-set eyes and a suit that had clearly been pressed with care. His shoes were polished. His hands, trembling just slightly, held a boarding pass that said 1A. The flight attendant, blonde and stiff-backed, didn't flinch. Her voice was crisp but hollow. "Sir, you'll need to return to your assigned seat in the back. This cabin is for first-class passengers only." He blinked. "This is my assigned seat." He held up the pass again. She didn't look at it. A second attendant appeared behind her, her expression already tight, like she was bracing for something. "We've had a seating change. Please don't make a scene." Something in him flickered. Hurt, then confusion, then something older. Something he'd buried decades ago. "I paid for this seat," he said, lower now. "Weeks ago. My son." The first attendant stepped forward, cutting him off. "Sir, I'm asking you one more time. You're making the other passengers uncomfortable." There it was. That word. Uncomfortable. He looked around. Every other face in the cabin was white. Not just the passengers. The crew. The pilots glimpsed through the open cockpit door. Even the framed photo on the bulkhead of the airline's founder, smiling, blue-eyed, and dead. The man smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the kind of smile that comes when the pain is too old to fight. The kind you learn after years of pretending something doesn't hurt anymore. And then the automatic doors opened. Someone stepped into the cabin. A tall man, early 40s, black, powerfully built in a tailored blue suit. His presence stopped the air itself. The lead flight attendant turned, confused. "Excuse me, sir, this is a restricted." The man raised a hand and cut her off without a word. He walked straight down the aisle, eyes locked on the man still holding the boarding pass. "Dad," he said. A gasp rippled through the cabin. Then, quieter, sharper, "What did they just say to you?" No one answered. The attendants froze. The father looked down at the pass in his hand, then back at his son. The son turned, slowly, to face the two women. "Do you know who I am?" Silence. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a silver badge, and held it up. It read, CEO, Tide Airlines. And then, calm as a whisper, he asked one question. "Which one of you decided my father didn't belong here?" Earlier that same morning, Thomas Bell had woken up before the sun. He did every day. His wife, Grace, stirred under the covers beside him but didn't open her eyes. She knew the rhythm by now. 43 years of it. Up before dawn, black coffee, front porch, silence. He liked watching the world come alive before anyone demanded anything from it. The old rocking chair creaked under him as he sipped from his favorite mug, world's okayest golfer. A gift from his son. The handle had been superglued twice. He wouldn't part with it for the world. The porch faced east. The sky was the color of bruised peaches. Birds were waking. Somewhere across the neighbor's field, a tractor engine coughed into life. It was going to be a good day. He was flying out to California to surprise his son, Miles. The boy? No. The man was making history. CEO of one of the country's biggest airlines. First black man to hold the title. Youngest in the company's history. The press had been calling him the Maverick. Thomas just called him Miles. It hadn't been easy, raising him. Especially after Marlene passed. But damn if that kid didn't rise above every obstacle life threw at him. Scholarships. Harvard. An MBA. A name that meant something in rooms Thomas had never been allowed to walk into. Miles had invited him to come out weeks ago. Said there was something he wanted to show him. Wouldn't say what. Just smiled that quiet smile of his and said, "It's time." Thomas had booked the ticket himself. Refused to let Miles pay. "It's not about the money," he'd told Grace. "I just want to feel what it's like. First class. Once in my life." She'd nodded. "You deserve it." He looked down at his watch. Time to move. At the airport, everything had gone smoothly. Security even called him sir. That was new. A young agent smiled as he handed back the ID. Have a good flight, Mr. Bell. He'd smiled back. I think I will. It wasn't until he reached the gate that the mood began to shift. The gate agent scanned his pass, hesitated just a second too long, then plastered on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Please wait here for a moment. He didn't understand. I thought it was boarding time. She looked past him. Just 1 second, say. A second man, maybe a supervisor, came over, whispered, nodded, disappeared into the jetway. The agent smiled again. You'll be boarding shortly. He didn't like it. Something had changed. But maybe he was just being paranoid. Old ghosts. He stepped onto the plane 10 minutes later, walked to 1A, put his coat in the overhead, sat down, and then she came. The flight attendant with the too bright smile and the eyes that didn't meet his. That's when it started. And now, standing in front of him, was his son. Not the boy who used to fall asleep on his chest during Sunday football. Not the teenager who'd cried the day they couldn't afford the new basketball shoes. Not the college grad in the ill-fitting suit at his first job interview. This man was something else. Powerful, calm, focused. Miles stared at the women like they were broken instruments, and he was about to fix them. But before he spoke again, his father reached out and touched his sleeve. Miles, he said softly, it's all right. Let it go. Miles didn't move. He looked down at the hand on his arm. The same hand that used to work double shifts at the plant. That one saved up for 2 years to buy him a laptop. That still had scars from jobs no one remembered. His jaw tightened. He looked up again. Dad, this isn't just about you. The flight attendant's voice finally broke the silence. It was brittle, defensive. We didn't know who he was. We thought. You thought what? Miles asked. No answer. His voice dropped. You thought he didn't belong, hey? He reached into his pocket again, pulled out his phone. Then he looked straight at them and said, You're going to fix this. Now. The father stood still, caught between pride and heartbreak. And as the cabin watched in stunned silence, one question hung heavy in the air. What happens when the people who say you don't belong find out you're the one in charge? Nobody moved. The flight attendants stood frozen, their expressions slipping, one from confusion to shame, the other from control to panic. The passengers in the front cabin sat silent in their plush seats, avoiding eye contact, gripping coffee cups and headphones and Kindles like lifelines. Thomas Bell was still standing in the aisle of first class, the boarding pass wilting in his hand. And in front of him, his son, the CEO of Tide Airlines, was glaring down the crew of his own company. Miles Bell didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His silence did more damage than shouting ever could. 1 beat. 2. Then he tapped his phone and held it to his ear. Kenya, it's me. I need a senior crew supervisor at Gate B22 immediately. A pause. No, not regional. Corporate. Another pause. Yes, right now. Tell them it's not a request. He hung up and tucked the phone back into his jacket. Then, finally, he turned to his father. Sit down, Dad, he said quietly. This is your seat. Thomas didn't move at first. His eyes flicked between the flight crew, the passengers, and his son, Miles. But Miles had already turned to the attendants. What's your name? He asked the one who'd spoken first. She blinked. Excuse me. Your name, he repeated. C. Carey. And you? He asked the second one. Danielle, she said, her voice tighter. All right, Miles said. He looked toward the front of the plane, where the pilot was now peeking out of the cockpit door, uncertain whether to step in or stay the hell out of it. You're not in trouble yet, Miles said, still calm, still level. But you're going to tell me, clearly and professionally, why you told my father to move to coach after he boarded with a verified first-class ticket. Danielle's jaw clenched. We received a last-minute upgrade for a frequent flyer. A Platinum Elite. He needed a seat up front. Needed? Miles asked. Carey chimed in. There was an empty seat in coach. We assumed Mr. Bell would be more comfortable there. Miles nodded slowly. You assumed. Without asking. Without checking. Without verifying anything. Neither woman said a word. I see. He turned to Thomas. You sure you're all right? Thomas's eyes were unreadable. I'm fine, he said, but he didn't sit. He stood tall. His voice was calm, but something behind it crackled. Miles faced the passengers next. Most were trying to disappear into their pillows and blankets, but he didn't care. "This is my father," he said, loud enough for everyone in the cabin to hear. "His name is Thomas Bell. He's a retired plant foreman. He's worked harder than most of us ever will. He paid for this seat, and no one, not even on my payroll, has the right to tell him where he does or doesn't belong." A hush followed. He looked back to Carrie. "I assume our Platinum Elite guest is still waiting at the gate." She nodded, quietly. "Then he can enjoy coach, or wait for the next flight." Carrie opened her mouth, then closed it. Thomas finally sat down. Not because he was told to, because he chose to. The rest of the passengers began shifting like they were just waking up from a spell. Someone cleared their throat. A laptop snapped shut. A man in 1C, a white guy in a golf polo, nodded slightly toward Thomas. But no one said anything. Miles stood for a moment longer, then leaned down to his father's ear. "You sure you still want to take this flight?" Thomas looked at him and smiled, small but solid. "You think I came all this way to turn around now?" Miles smiled back, but there was something heavy behind it. "All right, I'll be waiting when you land." Thomas reached up and squeezed his wrist. "I know, son." Miles turned and walked back toward the cabin doors just as a woman in a blazer came rushing up the jetway, tablet in hand, eyes wide. The corporate crew supervisor. He didn't stop to talk, just handed her his business card and said, "Handle it." Then he was gone. The doors hissed closed behind him, and the plane began to taxi. The silence around Thomas remained for a few minutes more. No one asked him anything. No one apologized. Not yet. But the weight in the air had shifted. He leaned back in his seat, pulled out a photo from his wallet. It was worn at the corners, a little bent. Miles at age 5, in a Batman costume, standing on top of a busted refrigerator in the backyard. Cape billowing, smile wide, one front tooth missing. Thomas stared at it for a long time. Then he looked out the window as the plane began to lift. It wasn't always like this. Thomas never asked for more than what was fair. He came from a long line of men who worked with their hands. Sharecroppers turned steelworkers. Soldiers turned machinists. Men who never made it past 40 without at least one herniated disc. His own father had once said, "They'll never let you in the front door, so you better know how to build your own." That had stuck with him. He'd spent years teaching Miles that exact thing. How to carry himself. How to listen more than he spoke. How to walk into rooms like he belonged even when no one said so. Miles had always been different. Quiet. Watchful. Smart beyond his years. Thomas remembered the first time his son beat him in chess. 12 years old. Didn't even gloat. Just reset the board and said, "Want to go again?" He'd known, even then, that his son was going somewhere he never could. But today had flipped something inside him. He wasn't angry. Not exactly. He was tired. Tired of how much he still had to prove. Even now, at 68, in a suit he wore only for church and funerals, on a plane owned by the company his son ran. He had done everything right. And it still hadn't been enough. Somewhere over Arizona, a flight attendant came by. Carrie. Her face was pale. She crouched beside his seat, her voice low. "Mr. Bell," she said, I want to apologize. What happened earlier wasn't right." He didn't respond right away. Then he nodded once. "I know it wasn't." She swallowed hard. "If there's anything I can do to make it right." Thomas looked at her. Really looked at her. She was young. Maybe late 20s. Scared. Not because she feared losing her job, but because she knew she'd crossed a line she didn't even realize was there. Until someone pointed it out. He thought about all the years he'd swallowed worse. About how easy it would be to lash out now. Instead, he said, "Start by treating the next man like me the way you'd treat your father." Her eyes filled with something, regret, maybe, or shame. She nodded and stood. When the plane landed in Los Angeles, Miles was waiting at the gate. No press, no cameras, just him, leaning against a column, watching the doors. Thomas walked out, his back straight, his carry-on in one hand. Miles met him halfway. Neither said anything at first. Then Thomas grinned. "You always did like to make an entrance." Miles laughed once. "Guess I learned from the best." They walked side by side toward the escalator. And though no one around them knew who they were, heads turned as they passed. Because something in the way they moved, quiet, certain, whole, demanded attention. But before they disappeared down the hallway, Thomas looked over at his son and asked, "So what exactly was it you wanted to show me?" Miles smiled. "You'll see." And with that, they stepped into the sunlight. The car that picked them up wasn't flashy. No tinted Escalade, no limo. Just a black Lincoln sedan with clean seats and cold air. Miles slid into the back with his father, and the driver, a middle-aged woman with locks and aviator shades, nodded in the mirror. "You too good with jazz?" she asked, her voice smooth. Thomas leaned back and smiled. "Long as it ain't smooth jazz." She laughed. "You're all right, Mr. Bell." Miles chuckled and gave her a look in the mirror. He always is. They drove in silence for a while, passing lax traffic and then cutting toward Century Boulevard. The city opened up like a slow spill, low buildings, gas stations, the long reach of palm trees casting skinny shadows on the road. Thomas glanced at his son. "You gonna tell me where we're headed?" "Almost there," Miles said. "Be patient." I flew 4 hours. Watched a flight crew try to bounce me to the back of the bus. I think I've earned a little impatience. Miles gave a small smile but didn't answer. Thomas sighed, looked out the window. "That girl, Carrie. She came to me mid-flight. Tried to apologize. Did you accept it?" "I told her to do better next time." Miles nodded. "That's more than most would have done." Thomas didn't respond. There was something building between them, and both of them knew it. It wasn't anger. Not anymore. But it wasn't peace either. It was the weight of knowing things had almost changed. But not quite. The car pulled into a private lot behind a low, modern building. Frosted glass, concrete lines. No logos. No sign. Thomas looked around. "This a restaurant?" "No," Miles said. The driver opened their door. Miles stepped out, then turned and reached for his father's bag. "I got it," Thomas said, brushing him off. "I may be retired, but I still carry my own." They walked side by side toward a security door. Miles scanned a badge. The door beeped. Inside, the space opened into a large glass corridor that overlooked a massive hangar. Thomas stopped walking. Down below, 2 large aircraft stood under bright lights. One was standard, white body, navy blue tail, a Tide Airlines logo. The other was different. It was matte black, sleek, aggressive but elegant. No commercial airline paint job. Just a stylized T in silver on the tail and a single word printed under the cockpit in silver letters. Thomas. Thomas blinked. "What the hell is that?" Miles smiled like a boy showing his father his first science fair ribbon. "That," he said, "is your surprise." They stepped to the railing. From this angle, the name was unmistakable. "I commissioned a limited fleet. 5 planes. Custom build. Best engines. More fuel efficient. New cabin layout. All first-class service. No coach. No middle seats. Real legroom. Real food. No nonsense." Thomas turned to look at him, stunned. "Why?" "Because you deserve to fly with dignity. And so does every other man who's ever been told they don't belong at the front of the plane." Miles paused. "You told me once you wanted to feel it. Just once." Thomas nodded, eyes still fixed on the plane. "So I figured," Miles continued, "why not give that to everyone else too?" The silence between them stretched. Then Thomas said, "That's my name on the side of that damn thing." "Yay, it is." Thomas chuckled, deep, a little disbelieving. "So let me get this straight. You made a whole plane, for me. Not just you. But yay, you're the reason it exists. And you're flying it." Miles shook his head. "I don't fly the planes. I build the future." They stood there a while, just watching. Later, in the private lounge upstairs, they sat over coffee and pie. Thomas cut into his slice slowly. "You know," he said, "this morning, I thought I'd gotten over it." Miles didn't say anything. "I've lived long enough to know how to keep my head down, pick my battles, but when she looked at me like I was trespassing, it was like I was 8 years old again in Mississippi, getting run off a porch because I asked to use the phone." Miles sipped his coffee. "I know," he said. Thomas looked at him. "You ever deal with that in the office?" Miles stared at the table for a moment. "Every day." Thomas nodded. "I figured." Another pause. Thing is, Thomas said, I didn't need to be in first class today. Not really. I don't care about the warm nuts or the legroom. I just wanted to sit there without someone deciding I didn't belong. Miles didn't respond. He didn't have to. Before they left, Miles walked his father back to the glass corridor one more time. The plane was still there, sleek and unmoving, a monument with wings. You will be the first passenger, Miles said. Tomorrow morning. Non-stop to New York. Then Chicago. Then home. It's a soft launch. VIP only. Thomas raised an eyebrow. VIP? Huh. Miles grinned. It's called the Thomas line. Who else would we start with? Thomas stared at the name again. He saw his past in it. His father's hands. His mother's voice. The sound of steel being forged in heat. The nights he spent teaching Miles how to play chess by candlelight during rolling blackouts. And now here it was, on the side of a jet engine. He turned to his son. I'm proud of you, he said, voice rough. Miles nodded. I've been waiting to hear that since I was 12. You earned it. They stood in silence again. But this time, it was full, not of what hadn't been said, but of everything that finally had. Back in the car, as they pulled onto the freeway, Thomas glanced out the window, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he was headed somewhere someone else had chosen. He was flying his own line now. The next morning, the terminal was different. Thomas Bell had been in airports before, plenty of them. But this one? This felt quiet, controlled, no chaos, no barking at the check-in desk, no elbows in his ribs at security, just a smooth glide from curb to gate. They'd picked him up in a black car again. Same driver, same smile. Back in the air today, Mr. Bell, she'd said, handing him a fresh cup of coffee with 2 sugars, just how he liked it. Now, standing in front of Gate 14A, Thomas took a slow breath. There were no signs, no announcements, just a glass wall and beyond it, the plane. His plane. It looked even bigger today. The boarding door opened quietly. A smiling attendant, young, dark-skinned, with a neat braid wrapped around her head, stepped out and waved. Mr. Bell, we're ready for you. No crowd, no line, just him. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, a subtle jazz track played over the speakers. Not the overproduced kind, but real jazz. Upright bass, brushies on the snare. The cabin doors opened, and he paused at the threshold. This wasn't a plane. This was a statement. Wider aisles. Every seat a pod. Dark leather. Walnut trim. The overhead lights glowed soft gold, like old lamps in a jazz bar. There were no overhead bins. His bag was taken and stored behind a sliding panel. A new face stepped forward. The flight director, maybe. Older, sharply dressed, with a pin on her collar shaped like a silver T. Welcome aboard, Mr. Bell. My name's Carmen. We're honored to have you. She handed him a hot towel and gestured toward seat 1A. Of course. He laughed quietly and took his place. Once he was settled, Carmen knelt slightly to eye level, calm and warm. Before we take off, there's someone who'd like to say a few words. A screen rose slowly from the seat in front of him. Miles appeared on the display. Not pre-recorded. Live. Morning, Dad. Thomas smiled wide. Morning, son. I won't keep you long, Miles said. Just wanted to say thank you for being the man I looked up to. For carrying us on your back when the world tried to shut the door. This flight? This aircraft? It's just the start. There's more coming. But no matter how far we go, this first one's always going to carry your name. Miles paused. I love you. Thomas swallowed hard. I love you too, son. The screen faded out. The engines began to hum. And for the first time in his life, Thomas Bell was flying not as a passenger, not as a seat number, not as someone lucky to be let in, but as the man whose name had finally made it to the front. The plane climbed smooth, cutting through a bed of morning cloud like silk. The cabin remained nearly silent, save for soft jazz and the rustle of newspapers. No loudspeaker interruptions. No plastic food trays. Just peace. Thomas leaned back and closed his eyes. But rest didn't come. Because now that things were quiet, old thoughts crept in. He thought of his own father, Clarence Bell, who never stepped on a plane in his life. Man couldn't read. Could barely sign his name. Worked the same cotton fields his grandparents had picked under a different name for the same men. Clarence had once told Thomas, "They'll let you work beside 'em, but they'll never let you sit beside 'em." Thomas believed that once. But now, he looked around this floating cathedral bearing his name. Maybe the old man had been right, for his time. But time was changing. Miles was proof of that. And yet, Thomas couldn't shake one thing. The look on that flight attendant's face yesterday. The split second when she looked at him and assumed. Like he wasn't supposed to be there. Like he had stolen something. Even with all this legacy, this progress, it still followed him. That invisible ceiling. Always just a few inches above his head. Carmen returned mid-flight. She crouched by his seat again, holding a handwritten menu and a tablet. "Would you like to order lunch, Mr. Bell?" He smiled. "You got meatloaf." She blinked, then laughed. "We do, actually. Smoked turkey meatloaf, green beans, mashed potatoes. Sold." As she tapped the order, she looked at him carefully. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded. "My father was a mechanic. Still is. Raised 3 of us after Mom passed. Seeing you on this flight, seeing your name on the plane, it means something. Not just to me, to everybody working this line." He looked at her, surprised. "This industry was built to leave people like us behind," she said. "But here we are." Thomas sat back, overwhelmed by how big the moment really was. "You ever wonder," he asked softly, "how many good men never made it far enough to be seen?" She nodded. "Every day." They landed in New York an hour early. The landing was soft, butter, as pilots say. When the door opened, Thomas stood, stretched, and walked out slowly. Waiting at the gate wasn't a crowd, but a small group. Press, notebooks and cameras, but they kept their distance. A young black reporter approached, maybe late 20s. Wide eyes. "Mr. Bell, do you have a moment?" Thomas adjusted his collar. "You from the Times?" "No, sir. Jetway Weekly." He smiled. "You local?" "Harlem, born and raised." Thomas considered, then nodded. "All right," he said. "Ask your question." The reporter hesitated, then said, "When you saw your name on the plane, what was the first thing that came to mind?" Thomas looked out the window, where the black jet sat shining under the sun. He didn't rush. Then he said, "I thought about the men who never got this far, who worked just as hard, maybe harder, who never got a headline, or a hot towel, or a chance to sit in the seat they paid for." He paused, and then I thought, maybe I didn't come this far for me. Maybe I came to hold the door open. The reporter swallowed. "Thank you, sir." That night, back in the Manhattan hotel suite Miles had reserved for him, Thomas sat alone at the window. He held the same old photo from his wallet. Miles in his Batman cape. Then he pulled a notepad from the drawer, wrote a few lines in blocky, careful print. He read it once, then folded the page and tucked it in his pocket. Tomorrow, he'd fly again. Chicago, then home. The world was different now. And for the first time in a long, long while, Thomas Bell believed it might stay that way. But the next morning, something would happen in Chicago that he couldn't have predicted. A moment that would force him to decide what kind of legacy he truly wanted to leave behind. The Chicago air felt sharp when Thomas stepped off the plane. Cooler than New York, even in July. The sky outside was an unsettled gray, the kind that never quite makes up its mind between rain and sun. Carmen stood at the jet bridge exit, hands clasped behind her back, smiling. "Welcome to Chicago, Mr. Bell." Thomas adjusted his sport coat. "You always this polite to the passengers?" She grinned. "Only the ones with their name on the tail." He chuckled, nodding toward the glass. "She's still looking good." "She always does." They walked together down the private concourse. No gay crowds, no announcements buzzing over the PA, just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional roll of suitcase wheels echoing somewhere far off. Miles had arranged another car, but this time, there was no driver waiting with a sign. Instead, a young woman stood near the exit, holding a folder and shifting from foot to foot like she had somewhere else to be. Her dark curls were pulled into a tight bun, and her tied Airline's badge was clipped sideways on her blazer. She caught sight of him, straightened, and stepped forward. "Mr. Bell? I'm Dana. I work in public affairs. Mr. Bell, Miles, asked me to escort you for the next part of your trip. Thomas eyed her carefully. Next part. Dana smiled, but it was tight, professional, too polished. There's been a change in your schedule, she said. Mr. Bell wanted to keep it a surprise. He frowned. He does like surprises. This one's different, she said, glancing away briefly. We'll explain everything in the car. Thomas hesitated, then nodded. All right. The drive took them out of the airport perimeter, past warehouses and loading docks, then onto a wide industrial avenue lined with old red brick buildings and chain-link fences. I thought we were heading to the hotel, Thomas said, peering out the window. We are, Dana said. Eventually. He turned toward her. You mind telling me what's going on? She looked like she wanted to avoid the question. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced down, read the message, and sighed. Okay, she said. There's a situation. What kind of situation? An incident. At one of our regional gates. Air Terminal C. Thomas waited. She continued. A passenger was denied boarding. Elderly gentleman. Black. First-class ticket. Gate agent said he was uncooperative. But someone recorded it. The clip's already circulating online. Thomas let out a slow breath. Dana added. He said his name was Langston Bell. The car fell silent. Thomas sat up straighter. My brother. 15 minutes later, they were in a secure conference room deep inside the terminal. Glass walls, frosted stripes, a row of monitors along the back wall. Miles stood waiting. He looked tired, pale, but focused. Thomas entered the room first. You didn't think to call me. I was going to, Miles said. Then I saw the footage. One of the monitors lit up. A paused frame. An old man at a gate counter. White shirt tucked into navy slacks. Eyes wide. Confused. Langston Bell. 74. Retired Air Force Tech Sergeant. Vietnam vet. His older brother. Miles clicked play. The clip was shaky, filmed from a phone. But clear enough. Langston stood calmly, holding his boarding pass. A young white gate agent pointed him toward the back of the terminal. Sir, I'm telling you again. This area is for first-class boarding only. I am first class, Langston said, voice steady. Check the pass again. I already did, the agent snapped. I've asked you to leave. A murmur from the crowd. A woman off camera said, Why is he being treated like that? Then Langston's voice again. Is it my tone? Or my skin? The clip ended. Thomas sat back hard in the chair. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, he flew in for the funeral next week. Our cousin Henry. Miles nodded. I know. We comped the ticket. He's never asked for a thing. Ever. Thomas looked away, jaw clenched. You want me to talk to him? Miles asked. No, Thomas said. This one's mine. They found Langston in a private waiting lounge, sitting stiff-backed, arms folded. His duffel bag on the floor beside him, worn and patched. His service cap rested on the armrest. He didn't stand when Thomas walked in. Just looked up. Well, you're late. Thomas pulled out the chair across from him. Sat down. Langston studied him. You seen it? I saw it. Langston nodded once. Didn't cuss. Didn't raise my voice. Just ask her to look again. I know. Langston leaned forward. You think anything's really changed? Tommy. Thomas didn't answer. Langston continued. I fought in 2 wars. Came home and couldn't sit in half the diners in Georgia. Now I'm 74 and still getting told I don't belong at the front of a damn plane. He let the question hang. Thomas swallowed. It feels like it's changing. Langston laughed bitterly. Feels. They sat in silence a while. Then Langston looked at his brother, eyes tired but sharp. You proud of what Miles is building? Thomas nodded. More than anything. Langston nodded back. Then don't let them use that boy's name to polish over the cracks. Make sure he knows what's still broken. Thomas reached out and touched his brother's hand. I will. Later that evening, Thomas stood in the hotel lobby staring at a flight display. His own name, Thomas, glowed across the board under Flight 701, departed. His private jet had left without him. He'd stayed behind, not out of obligation, out of choice, because there was something deeper than legacy, truth. And the truth was, The sky hadn't cleared yet. Not really. And the next step wasn't flying higher. It was making sure no one else got turned away at the gate. The morning light filtered through the hotel room windows, pale and cold. Thomas sat at the edge of the bed, fully dressed, shoes polished, hands resting on his knees. He hadn't slept much. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, but he ignored it. He was staring at the small folded piece of paper in his breast pocket, the note he'd written on the flight to New York. Just a few lines. Simple, but they carried more weight now than they had when he wrote them. He pulled it out, unfolded it, and read it again. For every man who sat quietly while they were told to move. For every father who told his son to stay calm instead of fight. For every moment we swallowed it just to survive the day. Time's up. He refolded it, slipped it back into his jacket, and stood. He had a meeting to get to. The Tide Airline's Midwest regional office sat in a glass tower downtown. Clean, modern, intimidating. The kind of place built to keep things moving and people quiet. Thomas walked through the revolving doors and was greeted by a young man in a Tide polo shirt and khakis. Nervous, eager. "Mr. Bell? Right this way." They rode the elevator in silence. Floor 21. The executive floor. At the end of the corridor was a conference room already half full. Middle managers, directors, legal staff. Most of them white. All of them shifting in their chairs when he entered. At the head of the table, Miles. He stood when his father walked in, but didn't smile. "Dad," he said, "glad you came." Thomas nodded and sat at the empty seat next to him. Miles looked at the room. "Let's get started." The presentation was already on the screen. Tide's internal review. Incident report 624C. Customer complaint, a hair terminal C. They went through the facts. Passenger denied boarding. Video evidence. Public backlash. Social media spike. Hashtag trending. Press inquiries. Union response. The gate agent had been placed on administrative leave. Thomas listened quietly, arms crossed. Then someone across the table, a middle-aged man in a pale gray suit, VP of Operations, cleared his throat. "Mr. Bell," he said, addressing Thomas, "we want to apologize to your brother. And to you. What happened at that gate? It was a breakdown in training and communication." Thomas tilted his head. "Is that what you think it was?" The man hesitated. "We're reviewing the policies. We're committed to improving the passenger experience across all terminals, especially for—" Thomas cut him off. "Let me save you the word you're dancing around. Especially for black passengers." "That what you mean?" The man flushed slightly. Yes, sir. Of course." Thomas looked around the room. "You all ever heard of the Green Book?" Blank stays. It was a travel guide. For black folks. Back in the 50s. Told you where you could stop, where you could eat, where it was safe to sleep without getting chased off someone's property or worse. My daddy used to hide it under the seat when we crossed state lines. No one spoke. He continued. "I flew your airline. I sat in seat 1A, and the moment I walked in, someone decided I didn't belong there. You think it's just about one gate agent." He looked at Miles now. "This is about culture. About assumptions people don't even realize they are making." Miles nodded, jaw tight. Thomas pulled out the folded note and slid it across the table. "This is what I wrote when I was still on that first flight. Before I knew what happened to Langston. Before this meeting. I want you to read it." Miles unfolded the paper, read it slowly. The others leaned in. Then Thomas said, "This isn't a brand problem. This is a soul problem. And you can't fix soul with PR." Someone exhaled hard. The room had shifted. Everyone felt it. Thomas looked straight at his son. "I'm not asking you to clean up the mess. I'm asking you to make sure the floor ain't dirty to begin with." Miles nodded slowly. "I hear you." Thomas leaned back. "Then show me." That afternoon, Thomas and Miles walked through a quiet terminal in a hare. The press had backed off. The hashtags faded. But the wait hadn't. Langston's headed home, Miles said. "I called him this morning. He's still mad. But he said to tell you he forgives you for always winning at dominoes." Thomas chuckled. "He cheats. Everyone knows it." They walked a bit more. Then Miles stopped. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said, and about what I'm building." Thomas waited. "I named a plane after you," Miles said. But that's not enough. I want to name the program after you. What program? Miles looked him in the eye. The First-Class Equity Initiative, starting with gate agent retraining, supervisor reviews, priority handling audits, and a new seat guarantee. If a ticket's paid, nobody touches it. No upgrades over it. No assumptions. Thomas was quiet, and I want to call it the Thomas Bell Standard. Thomas blinked. You serious? Miles nodded. Dead serious. Thomas looked away for a moment, swallowed hard, then nodded once. All right, he said, but only if it's not a photo op. It won't be. They stood there together, two generations of men who had spent their lives walking through locked doors, one breaking them open, the other building new ones. Thomas put a hand on his son's shoulder. You're doing more than flying planes, Miles, he said. You're changing where the runway starts. That night, back in his hotel room, Thomas sat at the desk, watching planes take off through the window. He picked up a pen and a fresh piece of paper. He wrote, "Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you open up." Then he folded the paper and smiled. Tomorrow, he would fly again. Not as a passenger, not as a symbol, but as the man who helped redraw the sky. By sunrise, Thomas Bell was already awake, dressed, and waiting in the hotel lobby with a cup of black coffee. He'd been up since 4. Sleep felt optional now. His body didn't ache the way it usually did. Not this morning. The driver pulled up right on time. Same woman from LA, sunglasses perched low on her nose. "You're making a habit of flying out before most folks eat breakfast," she said as he climbed in. Thomas grinned. "Old man habit. We beat the sun so we don't have to race it later." She laughed. "Where to this time?" "Home," he said, but with a few stops along the way. At the private terminal, the crew of the Thomas was already prepping the aircraft. Carmen met him on the tarmac, clipboard in hand. "Morning, Mr. Bell," she said. "You've got 3 legs today, Cleveland, Memphis, and then home. No press, just a few guests on each flight. Handpicked by Miles." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Guests?" Carmen smiled. "You'll see." He boarded the plane like it belonged to him now, and in some ways, it did. His name, printed on the tail, was no longer a symbol of vanity. It was a promise. The cabin was quiet, save for the soft click of crew prepping service and the low jazz on the speakers. Then he saw the first guest. Seated in 2A was a young man, maybe early 20s, wiry, with a hoodie pulled halfway over his head. He had earbuds in, but no music was playing. He looked like he wasn't used to being noticed or trusted. Thomas slid into his seat in 1A, nodded once, then turned slightly toward him. "You heading home?" he asked. The kid hesitated, tugged one earbud out. "Memphis." "You from there?" "Born there. Been living in Cleveland. My mom passed last week. I'm going back for the funeral." Thomas took that in. "Sorry to hear that," he said. "Yeah," the kid muttered, looking out the window. "Thanks." After a beat, he looked back. "You? Someone important or something?" Thomas smiled. "Something like that." In the air, the silence between them softened. They talked, slowly at first, then easier. The kid's name was Devin. Lost his job during the pandemic. Bounced around. Said his first time flying was just a year ago. "Some people don't think folks like me got a reason to fly unless we're running from something," he said. Thomas looked at him. "Or grieving something." Devin nodded. Thomas offered him a drink. "What you got going for you when you get back?" Devin shrugged. "Nothing. Just people waiting to tell me I look too much like my mom." There was a pause. Then Thomas said, "Sometimes going back is how you learn what forward looks like." Devin nodded slowly, not answering, but not dismissing it either. Before the plane touched down in Cleveland, Thomas reached into his inside pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Take this," he said. Devin unfolded it. His eyes scanned the top line. "The Thomas Bell Standard, Priority Flyer Scholarship Program, inaugural recipient." Devin stared at it. "I don't get it," he said. "I didn't apply for nothing." "You didn't have to," Thomas said. "Someone saw you. Miles did. Said you needed a second chance more than a round trip." Devin looked up, something cracking open in his chest. "Is this for real?" "Nothing's more real than someone betting on you when you don't even know you're in the race." Devon stood before the doors opened, his eyes wet but unashamed. He stuck out his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Bell." Thomas shook it, firm and sure. "Make it count." The next leg, from Cleveland to Memphis, brought 3 new passengers. 2 teachers, one retired, one still teaching 3rd grade in a school with metal detectors, and a community pastor named Clarence with deep laugh lines and a cane he refused to use properly. They all knew Thomas by name, but none of them acted like he was famous. They treated him like one of their own. Because he was. At 35,000 feet, over ice clouds and Midwestern farmland, they shared stories. Not about money, not about politics, but about what it meant to belong. "I've been teaching 27 years, said Ms. Carter, the 3rd grade teacher. "Never once flown in anything but coach. And even then, I always waited till everyone else boarded. Like I was a guest in someone else's space." Thomas nodded. "We all learned to shrink ourselves." Clarence leaned forward, cane resting across his lap. "But now we're expanding again. And you," he pointed his cane, "you cracked that damn door." Thomas smiled quietly. "I'm just keeping it open." At the Memphis terminal, the crew brought out something new. A small podium. No cameras, just a few airline staff standing in a semicircle and a modest sign. "The Thomas Bell Standard, first class belongs to all." Miles appeared, briefcase in hand, tie loosened at the collar, smile slow and proud. Thomas stepped up to the MIC, not because he wanted to, but because he knew this moment belonged to more than him. "I wasn't supposed to be here," he began. "Not on this plane. Not in this seat. Not in this industry. My family wasn't built for flying. We were built for surviving." He paused. "But I'm not here to survive anymore." A breeze swept through the terminal as the room stayed still. "I'm here to tell you that belonging isn't something we earn. It's something we claim. So from this day forward, nobody gets to look at a black passenger and ask, 'Are you sure you're in the right seat?'" A murmur of approval. A few heads nodded. One of the teachers dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Miles stepped beside his father, placed a hand on his shoulder, and the crowd knew they were watching history, quiet history, the kind that didn't always make headlines, but changed lives anyway. On the final flight home, Thomas didn't speak much. He sat alone in 1A, sipping tea, watching the sky go dark. He wasn't tired. He wasn't angry. He was at peace. As the plane descended toward his hometown, toward the porch where he'd taught Miles how to play chess, toward the house that held every memory he still carried, he felt something ease inside his chest. Legacy had once felt like a finish line. Now it felt like a relay. And the baton? It was already moving forward. The tires kissed the runway like they meant it, firm, but smooth. Thomas barely felt the landing. Outside, dusk painted the sky in lavender and steel. His hometown airport was small, regional, quiet. No terminals with towering glass. Just one long building with tan siding and a faded sign that still called it municipal. The plane taxied to a private gate tucked behind the main structure. As it slowed, Thomas leaned against the window, watching the place he left so long ago roll past. There were memories here, heavy ones. A gravel parking lot where his father once waited 3 hours in the cold just to see a pilot walk past. A vending machine where he bought a soda for Miles with quarters he'd earned patching tires. A hallway where a man in a suit once told him, "The interview's been cancelled," without offering a reason. That hallway wasn't there anymore. They'd remodeled. But Thomas hadn't forgotten. Grace was waiting in the lobby. She looked the same as always, strong, stylish, no nonsense. She wore the blue scarf he bought her last Christmas, and in her hands was a bouquet of red tulips she didn't even pretend weren't for herself. As soon as she saw him, she lit up like sunrise. He smiled. "Miss me?" She raised an eyebrow. "You were gone for 3 days, not a year." He opened his arms anyway, and she stepped into them, holding him a few seconds longer than usual. "You look different," she said. "I feel different." She leaned back and studied him. "In a good way." He nodded. "In a real way." That night, they sat on the porch. No speeches, no cameras, just the two of them, a bottle of wine, and a radio low in the background, playing Sam Cooke. The stars were out. Fireflies blinked along the edge of the field. Thomas rocked gently in the old chair he'd nearly thrown out twice before deciding it had too much life left in it. Grace sipped her wine. "So, you gonna tell me what happened up there?" He took his time before answering. "I flew. Not just on the plane. I mean, really flew. Saw myself through someone else's eyes for once. Like I belonged." Grace nodded like she'd already known. "You always belonged," she said. "You just finally let yourself believe it." He looked at her. Langston got stopped. Her eyes narrowed. "At the gate," he continued. "Same way I did. Maybe worse. Miles and I handled it, but it hit hard." Grace stared out at the dark trees. "Some things change slower than others." "Yay. You did something about it though, didn't you?" He nodded. Grace gave a small smile. "Then good. That's what you do. You've been doing it since the day you buried your father and didn't cry till everyone went home." Thomas chuckled quietly. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," she said. "And I'm proud of you. Not for the plane. Not for the name. But for walking back into rooms that tried to lock you out and holding the damn door open anyway." He let that sit in his chest a moment. Then said, "Devin, that kid on the flight, he's got a scholarship now. First of its kind. Named after me." Grace nodded again. "That's a start." Later, long after the porch light buzzed off and Grace had gone to bed, Thomas stayed outside, rocking in rhythm with the wind. He thought about Miles, about what it took to raise a boy into a man the world couldn't shrink. He thought about Clarence Bell, his father, who never boarded a plane but believed in flight anyway. He thought about Langston, about every black man who'd stood at a counter and been told, "Not he, not now, not you." And then he pulled out his phone. No texts, no news alerts, just one open draft in his Notes app. He tapped the screen, and with his thick fingers and steady hands, he began to type. "New rules. If you pay, you stay. If you walk in with respect, you get it back. And if you see a brother standing alone at the gate, you don't wait for the system to catch up. You walk over, and you stand with him." He saved it. Then, without really thinking, he hit send. The message posted to his Tide Airlines guest profile, the one Miles had quietly made public a few days ago. He didn't even know how many followers he had now. Didn't really care. All he knew was that someone, somewhere, needed to read that. Maybe they'd be in seat 9C tomorrow. Maybe they'd be working the counter, glancing at a name they didn't recognize. Either way, they'd see it. And they'd know. Thomas Bell wasn't flying for comfort. He was flying for clarity. He was flying for change. And his line was just beginning. The next morning, Thomas woke to the chirp of birds and the scent of coffee. Not from the kitchen. From the porch. Grace had beaten him to it. She sat in the rocker opposite his, already dressed, already alert, one leg folded over the other and a steaming mug balanced in her hand like she was waiting for news. "You went viral," she said without looking up. Thomas blinked the sleep from his eyes. "I what?" She nodded toward the phone on the windowsill. "Check it." He picked it up. 24 unread messages. 3 missed calls. Dozens of notifications flashing across the screen. Twitter, Instagram, even LinkedIn. At the top, # the Thomas Bell Standard was trending. Again, he tapped open the first video. A young woman, maybe in her late teens, recording herself at an airport terminal. "So I'm flying for the first time ever. My dad bought me a ticket, first class, one way, for graduation. And this gate agent looked at me like I was lost. Then I remembered what Mr. Bell said. If you see a brother or sister standing alone at the gate, you don't wait for the system to catch up. You stand with them." So I looked her in the eye and said, "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And you'll..." I sat in 1A like I paid for the damn airline. The comments were filled with people sharing their own experiences, some painful, some triumphant, all echoing the same feeling. Thomas swiped through videos of teachers, students, retirees, pilots, even flight attendants quoting his note like gospel. In one, a gate agent held up a printed sign that read, "We don't guess who belongs anymore. We ask, and we respect the answer." He sat down slowly, overwhelmed. Grace watched him, still feel like an old man who just wanted a wide seat and a glass of wine. He looked up at her. "No," he said. "Now I feel like a mirror." She frowned. "A mirror?" Thomas nodded. "I held up something simple. And people saw themselves in it. That's all this ever was. She leaned forward, rested her mug on the table. So what now? Before he could answer, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was Miles. He answered. Morning, son. You online yet? Miles asked, already knowing the answer. I've seen some of it. Well, buckle up, Miles said. You've got a press request from the New York Times. CNN wants a sit-down. Essence just called me personally asking if you'll write something. Thomas rubbed his eyes. All that just for speaking the truth. No, Miles said. All that because you spoke it without permission. By noon, Thomas was downtown. Miles had flown in. So had Dana from Public Affairs. They were in a borrowed office at City Hall, neutral ground. No Tide branding. No photo ops. Just conversation. We can use this, Dana said, standing by the window. Build the program faster. Push new training nationwide. Partner with HBCUs. Tie it all to your name. Thomas raised a hand. Stop. They looked at him. I didn't do this for a campaign. He said, I did it because my brother got humiliated. Because I've been humiliated. Because I'm tired of watching people shrink to fit. Dana nodded, measured, understood. But this is what movements are made of. They don't start in boardrooms. They start on sidewalks and jetways. Miles leaned forward. So how do you want to lead it? Thomas looked at his son. From the seat I owned. Not a pedestal. That night, they held the first community town hall under the Thomas Bell Standard banner. It wasn't in a hotel ballroom or some sanitized corporate space. It was in a high school gym. Scuffed floor. Plastic chairs. MIC duct tape to the stand. It smelled like old sneakers and fresh hope. Thomas sat on stage with 3 others, a union flight attendant, a young black pilot, and an older white woman who'd spent 20 years as a gate supervisor. The crowd was packed. Miles stood in the wings, arms crossed, watching. Thomas took the MIC last. I'm not here to teach, he began. I'm here to listen. But if I had to say one thing, it's this. If you work in a place where assumptions fly faster than truth, you gotta slow the whole thing down. He let that settle. See, we don't want special treatment. We want equal pause. The space to be asked instead of judged. That's what we're building here. And it doesn't end with me. He gestured toward the crowd. It starts with you. Afterward, a woman approached him. Elderly, dignified. She walked with a cane wrapped in velvet. You don't know me, she said. But I knew your mother. She worked beside mine cleaning houses off Franklin Street. Said you used to fall asleep under the kitchen table with a book in your hand. Thomas smiled. That sounds about right. She looked up at him. She would be proud. Not just for what you're doing, but for how you're doing it. He touched her hand. Thank you. On the drive home, Miles was quiet. Thomas glanced over. Something on your mind? Miles nodded. I keep thinking about that day. When I walked into the cabin. When I saw you standing there, smiling even though they were trying to take your seat. Thomas looked out at the dark road. I wasn't smiling because I was fine. I was smiling because I knew you were about to walk in. They both sat with that. Then Miles said, It's your name on the tail, but it's our name in the sky. Thomas turned to him, proud. We not done, he said. No, Miles replied. We just getting started. Back at the house, Grace was waiting with 2 mugs of tea and a lit porch light. And when Thomas sat back in his chair, he wasn't thinking about the past anymore. He was thinking about the gate. About how many people were still standing on the other side of it, ticket in hand, just waiting for someone to look up and say, Welcome aboard. The gate agent's hands trembled just slightly as she scanned the boarding pass. She tried to hide it, but Miles saw everything from where he stood at the side of the terminal. His eyes moved from her face to the line of passengers waiting to board Flight 217, the first commercial test run of the Thomas Bell Standard training protocols at a Tide Airlines legacy hub. This was the real test. No private terminals. No VIP handoffs. Just a regular Tuesday afternoon at Gate D4, Chicago Midway. It had been a month since Thomas's note went viral. A month since the town hall. Since the pilot program launched across 5 cities. Since Tide Airlines had to either stand behind the Bell name or risk losing everything it claimed to stand for. Today, there were no cameras. That was Thomas's condition. If it's real, he'd said, you won't need to perform it. So here they were. In line was an older black woman in a maroon church hat. Her shoes were sensible. Her purse was too heavy. Her boarding pass said 2D. The gate agent, Kelsey, early 30s, fresh off 2 weeks of new training, paused for half a second when she read the name, Mrs. Ernestine Clark. The woman smiled politely. Is there a problem, Day? Kelsey's throat tightened. She remembered what the older might have said, might have assumed. But not today. No, she said. Welcome aboard. And, may I carry your bag for you? The woman's smile widened. You certainly may. Miles smiled too. It was working. 30 minutes later, Thomas stepped onto the same flight as a quiet passenger in 4A. Not 1A. Not with ceremony. Just a man heading home. He nodded to Mrs. Clark as he passed. I saw your boy on the news, she whispered as he settled into his seat. I see where he gets it now. Thomas chuckled. He gets it from his mother. She nodded, then added softly, well, he's making room for us. The flight took off with little fanfare. Just another routine trip in the books. But Thomas knew better. Nothing about this was routine. Back home, the porch light flicked on as the car pulled in. Grace opened the front door before he reached the steps. How'd it go? She asked. Thomas set down his bag. Nobody got stared at. Nobody got questioned. The woman in 2D was treated like she was supposed to be there. Grace smiled. She was supposed to be there. He nodded. Yeah, she was. Later that night, Miles called. There's something you need to see, he said. I'm guessing it's not another hashtag. No, Miles said. It's something quieter. He texted over a link. Thomas opened it. A security camera recording. Low res. No sound. It showed a Tide Airlines gate at some small airport, maybe Tulsa or Little Rock. An older black man in a dusty blue suit stood at the counter. The gate agent, young, Latino, was pointing toward the waiting area, clearly asking the man to take a seat, clearly giving him the look. And then, a shift. A woman standing in line, white, maybe in her 50s, stepped forward. She handed the agent her boarding pass, said something, and pointed to the man's ticket. She shook her head, stood between them. Another woman joined her, then a younger man. The gate agent paused. Finally, he scanned the older man's ticket and motioned him forward, nodding. The man nodded back, clutching his coat, and boarded the plane. The others stood quietly and waited their turn. On the bottom corner of the feed was a timestamp and one line of text. This is the Thomas Bell Standard. Thomas watched it 3 times, then leaned back in his chair and let the silence carry it. The next morning, he went to the neighborhood barbershop. He hadn't been in months, not since all this started. The usual crowd was there, the men who'd raised him when his father couldn't. The old-timers who could talk politics, football, and conspiracy theories all in one breath. Kids in the corner waiting for their turn. Someone cracking jokes in the back. When he walked in, the room hushed for a beat. Then old Harold, gray goatee, known for talking too loud, called out, well, if it ain't the godfather of row 1A. Laughter rolled through the room. Someone slapped the arm of the chair. Another said, Mr. Bell, you flying solo or you bringing your plane too? Thomas waved it off. You ain't right. But he was smiling, because this was where it mattered most. The porch, the shop, the kids watching from the corner. You know what I saw? One of the barbers asked. Some kid out in Philly walked off a flight 'cause they tried to switch him out of his seat. Said, Mr. Bell didn't sit quiet, so neither will I. Had the whole cabin clapping. Thomas sat down, shook his head slowly. You'll better not start that. But inside, he knew it wasn't about him anymore. It never really had been. It was about what it meant to be seen. To be told, not in whispers but with systems and structure and protocol, yes, you belong. That evening, he sat with Grace on the porch. Same 2 chairs, same rhythm. He watched a plane blink across the distant sky. A silver dot heading west. She nudged his arm. You thinking of going back up again? Thomas thought for a moment. Nah. She raised an eyebrow. I'm thinking of who else should. She smiled. Well, there's always another seat. He nodded. Yeah, but this time, I want to be the one holding it open. In the house behind them, The phone kept ringing. Another airline wanted a meeting. A university wanted to rename a scholarship. A civil rights museum asked for an interview. But for now, Thomas Bell just rocked back in his chair, listening to the wind and watching the sky make room. The morning started with a knock. Not a phone call, not a calendar ping from Miles, not an alert from any of the half-dozen media people who now tracked Thomas's movements like he was a senator. Just a knock. Thomas opened the front door to find a boy on the porch. Maybe 13, lanky, nervous, wearing a wrinkled polo and a backpack far too heavy for his frame. "Mr. Bell." Thomas glanced around. "That's me." The boy took a breath. I'm sorry for just showing up. I live down the street. My aunt said I should come talk to you." Thomas opened the screen door and stepped out. "You in trouble?" "No, sir. Just school. We doing this assignment. People who change the world." He held up a spiral notebook with loose pages falling out the back. "Everyone picked like Rosa Parks or MLK. My aunt told me you lived right here in the neighborhood. Said you got a plane named after you and you made a bunch of rules about seats." Thomas tried not to laugh. "That's a very generous summary." The boy pressed on. "Can I ask you some questions?" Thomas looked out at the street, at the quiet line of houses and the morning sun warming the porchwood. Then he gestured to the spare chair. "Take a seat, young man." They sat for over an hour. The boy, whose name was Jalen, asked questions from a crumpled piece of paper. Some were simple. How did it feel when they told you to leave your seat? Others cut deeper. Did you ever think staying quiet would be easier? Thomas answered each one slowly, honestly. He told Jalen about his father Clarence, about steelwork and old cars and porch chess lessons. About Miles. About Langston. About watching a plane land and never believing he'd be on one. He told him about the first time he was followed in a department store at 17. And the last time it happened, 3 years ago. About how even when you lead a company, someone still decides whether your body belongs in the front. Isn't that messed up? Jalen said, eyebrows tight. It is, Thomas replied. But that's why we don't walk away from moments like that. We walk through them. And we leave the door open behind us. Jalen scribbled fast, nodding. Before he left, he turned and asked one more question. "Do you think I could be someone like you?" Thomas smiled gently. "No." Jalen's face fell, confused. Thomas leaned in. "You won't be someone like me. You'll be you. And that'll be enough." Jalen grinned. "Okay, I'll quote that." That afternoon, Thomas sat at the kitchen table with Grace, sorting through mail. One envelope was thick, cream-colored, embossed seal. He opened it, brows furrowing. "What is it?" Grace asked. Thomas held it up. Invitation to deliver the keynote address, National Transportation Leadership Summit, Washington, D.C. Miles had mentioned it in passing, but seeing it in print made it real. He set it down slowly. "You going?" Grace asked. He didn't answer right away. "I don't know," he said. "Feels like a lot." She raised an eyebrow. "You stood in a cabin full of people and taught them how to see differently. This is just a room with microphones." He laughed, shaking his head. "Yeah, but those microphones are pointed at lawmakers. Then say something worth hearing." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded. "All right, one more seat to take." That night, Miles called again. "Dad," he said, breathless. "Did you see the new policy? FAA just adopted a passenger rights clause based on the Thomas Bell standard. No gate-side demotions. Ever. All classes of passengers protected." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "They actually did it." "Yeah," Miles said, laughing. "You changed federal policy." Thomas exhaled. Not out of relief. Just gravity. Like the weight of history shifting slightly in his favor. When the speech date arrived, Thomas stood backstage at a downtown D.C. conference hall. Miles stood beside him, adjusting his father's collar like he was 5 years old again. "You nervous?" Miles asked. "I'm old. I'm always nervous. You want me to stand with you?" Thomas thought for a moment. "No, this one's mine." He stepped out into the lights. The crowd stood before he even reached the podium. Not out of celebrity, out of respect. He waited for the room to settle, then leaned into the mic. "My name is Thomas Bell," he said, steady. I was born to a man who never flew and a mother who taught me to walk straight even when the path was crooked. I was denied a seat I paid for, then watched my son walk into that cabin and remind everyone who really owned the sky. He paused. This isn't about planes. It never was. It's about what happens when power is held by the same hands for so long they forget how to open the door for anyone else. He scanned the room. You don't get to decide who belongs. You welcome them. That's what dignity is. That's what equity means. And that's what the Thomas Bell Standard stands for, not because I wanted my name in the air, but because I wanted us to finally come in for a landing, together. Silence. Then a wave of applause so long and full it didn't sound like clapping. It sounded like relief. Later, in the quiet of his hotel room, Thomas sat in the dark, scrolling through his phone. Dozens of messages, but one stopped him cold. A video, posted by Jalen. It showed him in his school gym, giving his presentation. My hero, Jalen said, is a man who took one flight and changed how we see each other. He didn't get famous for being loud. He got famous for sitting in a seat and saying, "This is mine, and I'm not moving." He paused, and I'm gonna do the same. Not on a plane, maybe, but in life, in class, in every room where someone looks at me like I shouldn't be there. The camera panned across classmates clapping. Thomas sat back and smiled, because somewhere, in the smallest room, the biggest thing had just taken off. The day Thomas Bell retired, for real this time, he didn't throw a party. No balloons, no banner, no farewell cake with too much frosting and not enough soul. He didn't want any of that. He just wanted a porch, a breeze, and a quiet moment where no one was asking anything of him. It had been 6 months since the Thomas Bell Standard became official FAA policy. 4 months since the Smithsonian had requested to display his first-class boarding pass. 2 months since the Department of Transportation had begun talks with Miles to implement the standard across all carriers, not just Tide. And exactly 1 week since Thomas had turned down an offer to run for Congress. He told Grace, "That ain't my seat." She'd laughed. For a man who spent his whole life fighting for a seat, you sure don't sit still. But now he was still, and stillness felt good. Mid-morning, Miles pulled up in his usual rental. He never stayed in town long enough to keep a car here anymore. He stepped onto the porch with a bag slung over one shoulder and something folded under his arm. Thomas looked up from his newspaper. "You're early." Miles grinned. "Since when do I need an appointment to visit my own father?" Thomas folded the paper and set it down. "I didn't say that. I just know your life runs on minutes now." Miles took the seat beside him. "I took a whole day off." Thomas raised his eyebrows. "The world's still spinning." "Barely," Miles said, "but it can manage without me for one sunrise." They sat for a while, watching the wind move through the trees. Then Miles leaned forward and handed over the folder. Thomas opened it. Inside was a single sheet of heavyweight paper. Elegant typeface. His name printed at the top. Thomas Bell Center for Transportation Equity and Policy. A joint initiative by Tide Airlines, the Bell Foundation, and the U.S. Department of Transportation. He blinked. "It's real?" he asked. Miles nodded. "Just got final approval. Fully funded. Scholarships, internships, research, national forums. We broke the system open. Now we're building the new one." Thomas sat with that. Then, "You sure you're ready to build something with my name on it?" "I've been ready since I was 12, Miles said. "Only difference now is the world's finally listening." Thomas smiled, but his throat caught. "I never wanted any of this." "I know. I just wanted a quiet flight." "I know." They sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was full. That afternoon, Grace joined them. They walked through the neighborhood, past the old church, past the school where Thomas had once fixed a broken swing with his own tools and no fanfare, past houses where he could still name everyone who'd ever lived in them. Neighbors waved. Teenagers nodded. A delivery driver stopped his truck just to say, "Mr. Bell, my grandmother told me about you. She said you saved her a seat." Thomas smiled. "She saved it first." That night, as the sun sank low and fireflies blinked across the yard, Thomas pulled an envelope from a kitchen drawer. Inside was the original boarding pass. The one from that day. Still creased, still slightly smudged. He walked it out to the porch, sat down, and just stared at it. It was more than a ticket. It was a moment. A line crossed, a life turning. After a while, he took a pen and scribbled something on the back. Then he tucked it in a new envelope. He handed it to Grace. She gave him a look. You sure? He nodded. For the museum. You want them to frame it? No, he said. I want them to leave it out in the open. Somewhere a little black girl can walk by, read the back, and know. Know what? Thomas smiled, slow and steady, that she doesn't have to ask anymore. Down the road, a plane passed overhead, glowing orange in the twilight. Not too loud, not too fast, just enough to catch your eye. On the tail, a silver T. Not a monument, not a brand, just a name, and a promise.